And Howarth, welcome back to This Is Horror Podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a nice little reunion, this. Good to see and hear from you both again. It's been a little while.
Yeah, and so long-term listeners will of course know that you are the original co-host of the podcast. So it is always a pleasure to get you back on the show. And in fact, the last time that I spoke to you, it was about a year ago when we were talking to David Moody as part of the House of Bad Memories launch. So as you may anticipate, I want to know what have been the changes or what have been some of the pivotal moments for you, both personally and professionally, in the last year?
Wow, big question. I think probably personally, changing jobs has occurred about 6 months ago now, something like that, for me, which was good. I've now gone fully remote, which is a lifestyle choice in and of itself. I feel like I've reclaimed some control over my time, which is nice. I know you're big on time management, Michael, so that's the kind of thing that will appeal to you. Good and bad things of losing your commute, though. So, no more sitting in the Mersey Tunnel screaming at my steering wheel, but also less time listening to podcasts and audiobooks. So, swings and roundabouts on that front. But I think as an overall mental health choice, yeah, it's working out pretty well so far, I would say. Number one cause of stress was commuting, so glad to ditch that, and the associated costs, which is nice. And then I guess I'd say in terms of kind of the writing front, just always busy. Like I'm like a writing magpie. I've got so many things going on, so many things I want to do. Working on Last Night of Freedom as well. Obviously I've edited that in the time since we've spoken and then brought it out. I've spent most of 2024 writing another book, so I've written like 150,000 words on a book to get like 80,000 words out of it, pretty much. It's an extremely wasteful experience. So all that time I've saved commuting, I've thrown away, basically writing the same book twice, which I do not recommend. And yeah, just writing, really. It never stops, never ends. It's just every day, get the words done, carry on motoring. That's just how it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying about having now gone fully remote and that having benefits for your mental health. I'm wondering though, and thinking back to when I was full time working from home, are you kind of having to do things to make sure that you get out the house, both for your, I guess, mental and physical health? Because I found that if I wasn't careful, it's like, hang on a minute, I've basically been here for about a week, and that isn't how we evolved. It certainly wasn't how we were meant to evolve anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are different now to how they were in the pandemic when almost everybody was working fully remote, like all the time. Certainly office based jobs. Everybody was either furloughed or working from home. And the thing then was there was nothing else to do. Now, all you're missing out on is going to an office. I get up, I get my daughter to school, I do the school run in the morning, I walk the dog. Like some of the days, my wife's here as well because she's doing admin days for the business that she runs. I'll get out in the evenings, play football, play snooker, see friends, stuff like that. But you've got to force yourself to make sure that you keep a routine because yeah, I mean, the pandemic were dark days for everybody, and it's because we were shut up at home. You've got to make sure that your house doesn't become a jail cell, really, to some extent, because it's easy to do. It's easy to say, you take my daughter to school today, to my wife, can you walk the dog for me? I've got meetings or whatever. And then before you know it, it's like 7 o'clock at night and you've not left the house all day. So it's easy done. You have to be proactive, I think, and careful with your mental health, definitely, to make sure that you've got routines and you've got outlets and stuff like that as well. Because nobody wants to regress back into your shell. It's great staying indoors sometimes, 70-mile-an-hour winds here today. It's been great to stay inside, but you can't do that every day. you've got to be careful with yourself.
Yeah, and as I recall before, when you were working at the office, you were getting a lot of your writing done in the library. So
Yeah,
presumably you're now writing your fiction mostly at home. And so
yeah.
what is the kind of difference in terms of dynamic and the creativity there? And do you miss any aspects of, I suppose, writing in a different place that's separate to where you're getting your day job done?
Um, yeah, sometimes. I mean, I don't always write up here. This is where I work, and this where most of my cool stuff is, books and all that kind of business. This is where I can squirrel myself away to. Um, I think the thing about kind of teaching myself to write in the library or a cafe or wherever it was is that I have the ability to do it wherever I need to now, which is a skill in and of itself. It's like I do have the ability almost to flick the switch, and it's like, right, it's writing time. It doesn't matter if I'm going in the next room and sitting down there and doing it on my lunchtime instead of going to a library. If anything, I know there'll always be a free desk, and I won't have to lose minutes, pushing students out the way to try and get somewhere to sit with my laptop. But I also, because we've still got family commitments and stuff. So like my daughter does theatre class. It's like 90 minutes there while I'll go and sit in the cafe at the theatre where she's doing all that and just sit and write for that time with a cup of tea or whatever. And, I'll drop her off at other activities. And sometimes it's more beneficial I'll even just sit in the car with the laptop, just tether it to my phone and just sit and type in the front seat, which is like making the most of the time. But when it gets to the winter and it gets dark and you're sitting in the front seat of a car illuminated only by a laptop screen, it's a bit of a weird look. But the point is, the words are getting done. And yeah, I've just trained myself now to write. It's writing time. It doesn't matter. It's 12 o'clock. It doesn't matter if I'm in the library. It doesn't matter if I'm in the office. It doesn't matter if I'm at home. 12 o'clock, bang, that's it. It's lunchtime. It's writing time. It just gets done. It's probably the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of like resilience and kind of mental health practices and mindset and things like that is just that ability that I've trained myself to do it. It's automatic and it doesn't matter where I am anymore. I can sit on a train down to London like I did the other week and just write because it's that time and I can just turn it on now. And I'm grateful that I've persevered with that because it's stood me in good stead of being productive.
Well, it's like Josh Malaman says that, whether you have a good or a bad writing day, when you then look at the draft after, you can't really discern between the two.
No,
And having that habit, having that consistency, I think that's key. And it's been really interesting to see your journey and to see the parallels between the both of us. Because, I mean, even when we started This Is Horror podcast, I think we were both we were only writing when we had that optimal routine
yeah,
down. And now if I'm queuing in a supermarket and a good story idea comes to me, or even if a bad story idea comes to me, I'll write it down quickly, really trying to maximize that time because, and any time that can be done that you can be writing, I think for me it should be really.
yeah. And it's, people always say, at what point can you call yourself a writer? I would say, well, at any point that you're writing consistently and you've got, a writing habit that works for you. It doesn't matter, I would write and write and write. I've got novels and novels stored, in OneDrive or wherever in the cloud it is these days. I would write them just for myself. Like I had this conversation with somebody else the other day who was saying that they're, struggling for sales and all that kind of stuff. And to my mind, it's not really about any of that. It's just the sheer joy of doing it. I would write just to write those stories down and just to complete them. That in itself is the joy for me. The joy of the first draft, the joy of completion, the joy of getting it down. Um, and as such, in order to be able to have that feeling, you've got to commit to bum on chair, no matter what chair it is, fingers on keys, and off you go. It is as simple as that.
Yeah, I've had numerous similar conversations recently. I don't know if there's something about, the winter, or particularly with it being a politically turbulent time at the moment, but there's a lot of people who they seem to be really dispirited with their writing journey. And I mean, the way that it is for me, I mean, there's so many kind of thoughts on the topic, but I think if you have any choice as to whether you can or can't be a writer, if you cannot be a writer, maybe you shouldn't, which is a really odd thing to say on a writing podcast. But I
Yeah,
think this is not an easy route, particularly if you're doing it, for financial means. That's kind of what I'm
yeah,
talking about here. And so I think, as I've said before, if you can find joy in the pursuit and the act of writing itself, then you have won. That means every time
yeah,
that you write, you win. I think, too, linked to the kind of financial aspect, this is very much a marathon rather than a sprint.
yeah.
So, if I look at the books that I have out, like House of Bad Memories at the moment, which I'm enormously proud of. I think it's the best book that I've written, but actually, in terms of sales, it's not quite there with the girl in the video. So for some writers, they would say, "Oh, well, that's a failure." But for me, it's like, well, as this is a long game, it's only been out barely a year at this
Yeah.
point, and the way that I see it, and not just through optimism, but having observed for over a decade other people's journeys, every time you release a new book, that is almost a ticket to the lottery. And it only takes one to really tap into something. And then the sales of everything else, they start to rise too. So I think there's almost this tendency to look at a long-term endeavor in a short-term way, and of course you're going to
Yeah.
be depressed or a little bit dispirited, and that is before we've even kind of tapped into this tendency to compare ourselves to other
Mm,
people. And when we do that, we always compare ourselves to the people who are a little bit higher than us. It's never like, let's
yeah,
compare ourselves to the person a bit lower. So I think, I'm not sure exactly what the answer is, but I think, a good starting point would be trying to find joy in the writing itself. That is going to set you up for winning. Also, I don't know, the more you can distance yourself from it purely as a financial pursuit,
yeah.
the better. Because there are easier and there are quicker ways to make money.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the way I look at it is, writing isn't my career. It's not my day job. It's not my full time income. We all have hobbies. So there's people who will go out and spend hundreds of pounds on going to the gym every year, or season tickets at the match, or buying a new guitar every year, or whatever. Well, maybe my outlays are for my hobbies. I hate it. I don't really treat writing as a hobby. I don't see it as that way. But for my kind of leisure activities, is investing in somebody to read the audiobook or the cover art or copy editing or whatever it may be. And those are my expenses. And yeah, they all come at once. But I would imagine that I probably only still spend the same amount on pursuing getting a book out as some people might do on quite an expensive gym membership or buying a guitar or something like that, as I say. And with that in mind, I just see it as, well, that's my expense on something that I would do anyway. If I didn't spend the money on that, if I wasn't a writer, I'd probably, get a season ticket, or, whatever it may be. I'd still spend that money. So I'm just investing in myself in that way. And I don't see it as money lost. It's money spent to pursue something that I enjoy doing in the same way that other people invest in other things they like to do. It's as simple as that. But I think as soon as you make writing a numbers game, you always destined to be disappointed. And I would strongly recommend that people don't do that, because the second you start doing that, or as you say, Michael, looking at others, it's one surefire way to make something that should be fun miserable. You know,
Mm.
it's about it's just quite a negative way to be, and I try to not fall into that trap as often as I possibly can.
Yeah, yeah, and
Hmm.
it's a complicated one too, because of course both of us, we are doing this professionally, in the sense that we're not doing it just as a hobbyist. We are doing it, to make money. But the point that I'm probably quite inelegantly trying to convey is that you can't make the money the number one priority.
Mm,
If you make the
yeah,
creativity and the writing the number one priority, then almost in a bizarre combination of serendipity and irony, you will actually make more money. So, yes, you should
yeah,
make financially savvy decisions. You
yeah,
should do your best to make it a success, but you shouldn't compromise the art and the writing itself.
yeah.
And that's why
Totally
I
agree.
say this is a long game. There may be some books that hopefully you won't make a loss, but you might not make as big a profit as you do on others. And that's why, you're kind of playing this game. And particularly if you're early into your career, you're throwing ideas out, you're throwing different modes out and seeing what sticks, what there is an appetite for. And if we become really successful, and then we can get to almost this mode that we see a number of actors get to, where they're doing a project with more financial concerns, and then they're doing one just for them and for the creativity and the art.
Yeah, well, that's the actor's way, isn't it? By the time they get to that point, it's or the filmmaker's way. Usually, it's one for them, as in one for the studio, and then one for me as the individual. But I mean, you talk about it being a long game, so I'll give you an example of how that kind of plays out, and hopefully this will give you some reassurance for House as well, which obviously is a really good book and deserves more readers. But I mean, like, so I released Dark Missives, my short story collection, in 2021, and it did okay. Like, it got good reviews and people read it. Not as many people as I think I would have hoped, but enough. So it was, that's good. In the month of October this year, I joined a promotion called Terrify Your Tablet, whereby you can promote your books on discount. And in that month of October, it sold probably three times more than it had sold in the 3 years prior to that in 1 month. And it outsold Territory, my novella, which I wasn't expecting. I thought, well, I'll drop the price of both. I put Dark Missives down to free, but that kind of, it was periodically free throughout the month. And even when it wasn't free, people were still buying it, and it was getting read on Kindle Unlimited. So it was getting loads of page reads and stuff. And I thought, oh, Territory will take off here. But it didn't. It was Dark Missives. So 3 years later from being released, it's well and truly earned out any expenses I ever had for it, any expectations I ever had for it. And that was a book that, had a decent but not stratospheric launch. Yet 3 years after I'd kind of almost not forgotten about it, but just accepted where its levels of sales were as a project, it took off out of nowhere, and I just totally wasn't expecting it. So, yeah, it is a marathon, and there's nothing to say that you know something isn't going to come of a book that you've released years ago. It's out there. You've achieved that milestone, and good things can happen because you put the work in and you enjoyed the process, and now it's there for people to enjoy. And it might not be on launch day, it might be many years down the line. Publishing is a very immediate business. Big publishers, they want to see chart topping success on day one, or that's it, you're gone. And I think there's expectations in indies as well, when people are producing their own books and self-publishing and whatnot, that it's either a hit straight away or it's never going to be, and that's not always the case.
I think that there seems to be like a big push for people wanting to do quantity. I see that a lot on social media. Is you have writers that they want to push out more and more and more product, because I guess they feel like, hey, whatever little success I have, if I have more of me to go around, then financially I will probably do better. And I think that that could be a good strategy, but to me, it's all about the quality. If you look at like one writer, for example, Ira Levine, you know, he only wrote like maybe 6 novels, and if it wasn't for Rosemary's Baby, he would have never gotten the success that he had. He would have been, just probably another mid-list, science fiction writer. But he did get that success, and it allowed him the freedom. All it takes is one. That's all it takes. And from what I've read, I don't think he even really got that great of a deal. He kept writing because it was a sense of accomplishment. I'm going to take this idea and I'm going to twist it and turn it around, and I'm going to be real clever in a way that I only me can be. Only I can do this. And I'm gonna present it, and we're gonna see if we can get it published. And boom, he get published. Stepford Wives, Boys from Brazil, Sliver, on and on and on. You know, And so when you got a writer like that, another one, Thomas Harris, it's like literally every film, I mean, every book he's ever written has been made into a film, with the exception of the last one, which I mean, that's probably coming. So, um, it's quality, and it ebbs and flows, but I see a lot of writers, it's like, it's like they put out like 3 books in a year. It's like, fuck, man, I ain't got that kind of time. I mean, how you doing that? I wish I had that kind of time, but I mean, if it's good, it's good. But I really think that's, people get bogged down in the nuts and bolts of the business, and they're losing out on the pleasure of writing, the actual sense of
Yeah,
accomplishment that comes when you create something and you finish it. Man, that's a feeling. You can't beat it. Well, I mean, you
yeah.
can, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, you've got to find the balance between the two. There's a joy in seeing your book in people's hands, and hearing them enjoy it, or seeing reviews. It's a different type of joy. It's not as pure as the creation of it. It's a nice little feeling to see money coming in from Amazon rather than money going out to Amazon in your bank account. That's a nice feeling. It's not as good a feeling as sitting down and writing, but it's not bad. Finding a balance between those things is exactly where we need to be. But it has to start with the joy of writing, certainly for me, because that's why I started doing it in the first place. It was the joy of getting something down, getting something completed, trying to find something to say that felt worth saying, and then it spirals from there. I want people to read it. Oh, I want to sell a few copies. I want it to look like this. I want it to be in a bookshop. You have goals that spiral, but they all come from that initial need or that initial feeling. I want to get something out into the world. I want to get this story out of me and see it through.
And so, talking about getting things out into the world, that is a fantastic time for us to jump into talking about Last Night of Freedom, which for me is absolutely one of the best books of 2024. I mean, it it absolutely shook me, and I was addicted from start to finish. I wanted to keep reading. I wanted to keep finding what happened. Like, the pacing is absolutely masterful. You won me over with the concept, and the ending was just as satisfying as it could have been. So, I mean, we spoke again with Josh Malaman, who I seem to be name dropping, like I think I'm gonna win something. It's not intentional, but he talks about, all of us have it in us to write an all timer or a classic. And for me, this is kind of an instant horror classic. So let's begin, as we often do. What was the genesis of this book?
Well, first of all, thanks for the kind words, Michael. We've known each other a long time, and you're a person who I know isn't impressed easily when it comes to books. We've disagreed in our opinions over books for many years in some ways as to what our favourites are, and we've had many conversations. So for you to give me praise like that is hugely gratifying, and thank you very much. It's
Yeah. Let's
yeah,
clarify. I don't give kind words. I give honest words. I mean, Jesus
yeah,
Christ, you've worked with me as an editor. There have been times where there has been very few
yeah.
kind things that I have said, but I think, that honesty that helps us get to places. My style isn't for everyone, but for those who are into it, I think that there's progress and there's advancement. So for me, there's nothing kind about what I just said. It is completely honest in how I feel about the book.
Thanks, man. No, it's great. And I know there's no bullshit there, so yeah, it means a lot. Put it that way. Yeah, to get on to like the genesis of the book, I mean, fuck, it came from stag do's. We're stag parties. We're all men. We've all been on one, right? And there was one in particular that I went on. It wasn't long. Must have been at least 10 years ago now. At least 10 years. And it was somebody who I knew from university, and quite a few of us, we flew out to somewhere in Eastern Europe. I'm not going to give names and locations because I don't want to give too much away. But yeah, so we flew out there, and you kind of get there, and a lot of these kind of weekends, it feels like they're almost designed to make you end up having to do something that you don't feel comfortable doing. Like whether you're the stag or whether you're just there, like you always seem to. There's always somebody who's doing something they don't want to do, almost at every twist and turn of a stag party. And for me, this was we got in a minibus from the centre of this town, and we went out to this place. It was like a farm, and they had this underground shooting range where they had automatic weapons. So the next thing you know, I'm stood at the block and I'm holding this gun and this automatic weapon, and it's got all this recoil and it's just firing, pumping round after round out. I'm like, I handed it back to the guy, and there's other people high fiving. I go, fuck yeah! Can you believe we just did that? And I'm like, no, I can't really believe I just did that. Like, I spent my whole life just thinking these things are fucking stupid. They're pointless. I'm not going to get on a big gun control rant, but it's a very British mentality. We don't have guns. We use them for work when people are farming or in the police at certain circumstances, and you're in the army, and that's about the limit of when you have a gun in this country. So they're very alien objects, and whilst other people were clearly feeling very pumped up and they were certainly enjoying that experience, for me, I thought it was horrible, to be honest. I couldn't have enjoyed anything less. And that just kind of got me thinking as to, these are the kind of things that we as men are kind of made to do. The atmosphere on these weekends it's rarely pleasant. It's not relaxing. There's bravado. I suppose dick measuring in some way. It's who's the biggest man, who's got the biggest pair. You know what I mean? It's that kind of attitude, and I don't like any of that. And I was just stood there, like, and later on, a few people who were there, like, got into a fight, like, just in the middle of this town. And I just, like, me and my other mate who I'd gone with were stood there literally eating a kebab, just watching people we'd known for years brawling in the street. And we just looked at each other and went, I just want to go home. Like, and it's just such an alien experience. And it just made me think, there are people who live for those weekends and people who really don't. And it just made me think of kind of the different sides to men and the different sides to those weekends, and some of the aggression and the bullshit that comes along with them, but also some of the kind of self-reflection and introspection that it can bring on you as well. So that was the ultimate genesis of it, and I think it was just bubbling away from that point on, to be honest, inside me.
Yeah, there are so many kind of like influences or touchstones or films and books that I recalled while reading it. And whilst perhaps not one of the most obvious ones, I mean, since you've gone there in terms of the commentary on masculinity, there's definitely something a little bit Fight Club about it in terms of, what is it to be a man and this primitive nature and this one-upmanship.
Yeah, that's definitely intentional. Like maybe not Fight Club, but certainly that, obviously it's a well-known discourse around that kind of book, that the comments made on masculinity, and I think they're probably more valid today even than when that book was written. What does it mean to be a man these days? And I think everybody, every gender, every race, every religion is questioning their place within society at the moment. And I think men have to look harder, or should be looking harder at themselves than any other group right now. It's we're behind so many problems, and we seem to be bringing more rather than be bringing solutions. So yeah, Fight Club is a huge influence on us both, and I know you're a fan as well, Bob. And yeah, just I always find myself, my instinct has always been to shrink from those kind of situations, that kind of aggression and that kind of confrontation. Whereas you don't only have to go into any city centre on a Friday or Saturday night, and you see people who rise to it. And I find that fascinating to try and get into the minds of those people and to understand what makes them do that and what makes them tick. And I think to some extent, Last Night of Freedom was my attempt to try and do that and to understand what I see as the very dark side of masculinity, and how it works, really. Maybe try and break it down a bit in some ways.
Yeah, is that I've never read a story about a stag party in England. In England, is that pretty much indicative of how they typically go? I mean, because it sounds like that's the case. I felt like this was just like this particular specific stag party was like that. But
Uh,
I think it's just a bunch of guys that got to groom the best men, some groomsmen going out and having some drinks and playing pool and uh, just getting drunk.
yeah, there's generally more to it in the UK, like, and this
Okay.
isn't everybody's experience, but a lot of them, and I could go into Liverpool probably even now and see people dressed up on a stag party, and they do go dressed in a very provocative, outrageous way. You see all sorts of crazy stuff, and you see them circulating on social media where people have gone arguably too far in terms of demeaning people through fancy dress. But particularly over here, there's, it seems to be getting like bigger and bigger and bigger. You've got to do more and more and more. It's like you travel further, you dress in a fancy dress costume that's more outrageous. You beat up the locals. You do whatever it is. And I must admit, I've never been on one where anything truly, truly awful has happened. Like this one here that I mentioned, going out to Eastern Europe, was the worst one. And it, as I said, you see people that I knew from university fighting in the streets, and you just think, what the hell is going on? But I've never seen that on any others. I've been on ones that were borderline civilized, borderline tame.
Yeah.
Certainly my closest friends who have been on their stag parties, nothing outrageous has ever happened. But over here in particular, you speak to anybody, any man who's been on one, and they've all been on one that's been awful in some regard, whether it's just generally kind of being a bit degrading towards women that they've either paid for or haven't in situation, or violence, or just there's always everybody's got a story about one that has just been vile.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it is a theme over here, definitely.
Yeah. And I definitely didn't mean like they all end up where you have to fight a whole family who's built a tradition. I meant like the initial part. I mean, because to me that would be like the ultimate thing to do. And over here, I guess in Texas, the ones that I've been on, you end up bored at a strip club, uh, or it's a private party with with adult entertainment, um, and so it's like, hey, yeah, that's everybody's getting drunk and everything like that. And yeah, we've had some I've been on some really me and some friends have been on some that were really really bad. It was like, hey, that's a lot of cocaine. We need to go. That is a lot of fucking cocaine, you know. And it's
Yeah.
like that's a fucking kilo, dude. I am not going down. I don't care how much we love him and everything. See you tomorrow, man. We got to go. We got to go. you know. And so I've been in some really crazy situations, but I would probably welcome a stag party where you just sit around and just drink and play pool. You know, I guess I'm getting old. I don't know. I mean, to me, that would be like just a night to catch up and talk and laugh and cut up. And that's when I felt like that there was some this type of camaraderie, especially when you have these individuals, some of which sound like that they really haven't seen each other, or they kind of drifted apart. And that's a good way to bring people back together, especially for a joyous occasion. But in their case, it doesn't end up that way. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they should be, but they very rarely end up that way. In my
Yeah.
experience, you get a good chat on the flight or traveling to where you're going, and then basically all hell breaks loose, and that's kind of how these things go when you arrive, really. So, and then
Oh,
everybody
wow.
just makes the way home zombified and hungover the next day. But you've raised your point there, Bob, and this is what I'm getting at with stag parties. We all reach a point where we go, "That's enough for me,"
Yeah.
and I keep going on Pablo Escobar's stag do by the sound of it, and seeing a kilo of coke. There's your limit, Bob.
Yeah, I mean I've walked into to a bachelor party. We were like an hour and a half late, and it was at someone's house, and just pulling up in the driveway, and my buddy's like, "There's a naked girl in the front yard," and I'm like, "No, like yeah, there is." Wow, and the neighbors are out too. Boy, this is going to end quick, you know. Hey, what's up? And it's just like it's just you know crazy. There's too many people. It's like we're in the hell. Somebody like this is your whole wedding party. What's the deal? And it's like it's not a bunch. It's not 4 or 5 friends getting together. There's like 100 people, but it's a bachelor party.
Yeah, they're just dreadful. They're just dreadful experiences generally, and I felt like I'm in a good place now. I've done my time. My friends are married. I never have to go on one of these things ever again. I'm getting to the point now where I feel like I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. I don't have to go anywhere I don't want to go. And I can
Yeah,
just, this was me writing out my system of all the times that you're in these shitty situations doing stupid stuff, or somebody's doing stupid stuff. And yeah, I've exercised those demons on the page, and it feels good. Yeah, I'm glad to put those
mm-hmm.
days behind me. It's a stupid way to live your life sometimes, being a man, and that's one of the things I wanted to get onto the page. And hopefully I've managed it, because I think there's something in there about stag parties that anybody who's ever been on one will relate to, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the appeal, just how relatable it is. I mean, in terms of Bob's question about you. Is this typical for a UK stag party? I mean, as you alluded to, it really does depend on, the friendship group and whose
Yeah.
stag it is. But I would say what you've presented is very much kind of typical as to part one of the night. Now,
Yes.
luckily, part two of your story is not typical of the second part. But yeah, I feel like it will start off relatively harmless. Okay, everyone's at a pub, we're having fun. And then there's a turning point, as there is in all good stories, and the
Yeah.
stag night goes completely off the rails. It's when they decide, let's go to this seedy part of town or this club that we never ever go to. I'm sure that'll be fun. Well, it
Yeah.
never is.
No, it
But
never is.
yeah, like you also mentioned, there seems to have been a tendency, I guess, in the last decade or two for people in the UK. It's no longer good enough to have the stag party within the UK. They're like, let's go to Europe or let's go to
Yeah.
America. Let's infect another country just trying to live their lives with our obnoxious British behavior and one-upmanship. And yeah, you have taken that to kind of the next level. It's like, well, what if this unwanted group turn up in an area where they're like, well, we're going to really have some fun with you. And in fact, we haven't actually told people the elevator pitch. Hopefully, they've got the gist, but just to kind of give the elevator pitch or the log line, what is the
Yeah.
story about, Dan?
So it's four like kind of friends from university, in the kind of 30s, so the lives have moved on. They get together for one of their stag parties up in a remote part of the Lake District, which is a scenic but can be quite cut off area of the UK. And they find themselves pulled into kind of a local ritual whereby people who live in the local area on their stag parties, they hunt people for sport. And part of that came from the fact that the origins of a stag party actually came from, it would be you go out with your friends and you go into the woods and you hunt deer or whatever it may be, and you cook it and you kill it and you eat it, and that's your bonding experience with your friends. So I took that and thought, well, what if people in this particular area where our four protagonists are hunt people as part of that tradition instead of hunting deer? So yeah, they hell breaks loose. Let's leave it at that for fear of too many spoilers for people.
Yeah, and the most obvious kind of comparison to me was a little known movie called Caliber, which I know we're both fans of. But I think as well, at the moment where this kind of survival game element is introduced, there's initially a very an American werewolf in London vibe. It's like, oh shit, we are in the wrong pub. But then as the game occurs, there's almost something a little battle royale about it because now it's everyone for themselves. And you can say that you will die for somebody, but it's like, well, when it comes down to it, will you really? Are
Yeah,
they that good a friend?
and I think that's the question at like the heart of it. Obviously the log line on the front is one weekend, one hunt, one survivor. The kicker is it's easy if there's four of you and you're being pursued through the forest, and all you have to do is get yourselves plural home. The whole point of this is only one of them will be allowed to go home alive. And at that point, you're looking at the people who are pursuing you and thinking, well, I've got no chance with them. But then you start looking at the people that you're with and thinking, well, you know, which of these people can I rely on? And which of these people am I faster than, stronger than, smarter than? And we don't often, and nor should we, really look at our friends in that regard, I would say. Certainly not in the callous way that you would have to look at in this situation. So, to be honest, rather than being chased, it's that only one of them going home alive that was the key bit that kind of piqued my interest when I was thinking of this idea. Because you do put yourself in that situation and think, well, how far would I go in order to preserve myself over people I've known for decades? And I think it's an interesting question to ask, and it was an interesting one to answer, to be fair.
Yeah, and I think you also anticipated a lot of the, I suppose, obvious ways of trying to get out of this. So to begin with, the phones have, it's not a spoiler to kind of, is it a spoiler to say some
No,
of the
not about the
things you've
phones. No,
yeah,
no.
so
Yeah.
the phones are out of bounds, let's say. They have been locked up somewhere, to make sure there's no distractions. And also, and any kind of easy means of just being like, right, we're gonna leg it, have disappeared too. And as the entire village or the entire town is in on it, you know, you couldn't really run and run far enough in that time. I don't know, maybe if one of the characters had been Usain Bolt, it's like, we've got a problem. He has
Yeah.
literally bolted, as his namesake would suggest.
Wasn't a distance runner, though, to be fair. Quick
There
off the
you go.
mark,
Yeah,
but
he'd do very well getting to the local supermarket, and then
yeah.
then he would
then
slow down.
he's gassed. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
totally gassed at that point. But
yeah,
yeah, that was important to me to be able to, a remote setting is one thing, but to fence them in enough to make it, they had to confront the people who are following them. They had to confront each other to construct that kind of ring fence around the characters. To me, was very important to put them in that kind of pressure point, of we're going to boil this down now to, it's not us versus them. It might be us versus us. And I think that is, it's important to construct a situation that was plausible and believable that puts people at odds with each other. And that's, hopefully something that has been successfully done in the book, because it did, I did try and think of every way out of this, and give a decent, plausible, and proper way of making sure that it was shut down, so that people had to confront each other.
yeah. And in terms of realism and really anticipating, well, how would people be? I mean, one of the lads on the stag night, he reacts like, after they've got out of the situation, like, what a fucking laugh, what an absolute riot, what
Yeah,
a joke. Because I think, if you think about, if you're in that situation, assuming that you are of sound mind, you're probably not going to be like,
no,
right, let's kill each other then. That's what we've got to do. You're going to think somebody is winding me up, and it's going to take a lot for you to realize, no, this is a real situation we've got here.
yeah, exactly. I think also because it's a stag weekend, you expect pranks and silliness, and it almost feels like it wouldn't be beyond somebody to arrange something like this to, shit up the people who they've taken on this weekend. So I think laughter at first in the face of something that's stressful and dangerous is a normal reaction. It's certainly probably would have been my reaction. Fucking nice one. That's funny, that. And then all of a sudden, that they have an event, which we'll say, which hammers home that actually people aren't playing here. And at that point, the novel kind of switches from, you lose a lot of that joviality, those kind of humorous moments certainly slow down at that point, and you realize that actually these people aren't playing, and there are lives at stake, and it felt important to me to have that moment. But when I was trying to think of what my honest reaction would be, I think first and foremost, I probably would have laughed and gone, "You got me," which was why I had to write it in, because,
Yeah.
yeah, I think quite a few people would share that, hopefully. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And see, now you've got me thinking, and I think we have seen things like this in horror movies before, a kind of alternate version of this story where actually it is a joke, but you've got some fucking loose cannon that they immediately get out and he stabs his friend. And now you've got to deal with that. That
Yeah,
too would be an interesting story. It's a different story, but I kind of want to see Last Night of Freedom too, which is a completely different take. How are they now going to get out of this situation?
yeah, it's actually a good idea, that, to be honest. Yeah, it's a little bit like Milk and Cereal. Have you seen that film on YouTube?
I have not, no,
Oh, right,
but
okay. It's worth a
I
watch.
will seek it out after.
It's somebody made it on $800, and it's about like two YouTube pranksters playing pranks on each other that eventually get more and more kind of serious and sinister. But check it out. It's only an hour, but it's really cool. It's a great concept, really well delivered, actually. But yeah, you're right. It could have gone either way, but I wanted to take it in the direction I saw was more horrible. Really, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you've written, as I said, one of the best books of 2024, so it was a very good direction to take it in indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, that point that you mentioned earlier, and I'm not going to spoil it, but that point when you realize that ultimately this is not a game. It's a game to someone, but it's not. To our main characters, it's serious business. Up until that point, I felt as though, because it seemed like we have a community that is involved in this tradition, and I had this feeling of Venter's the game in the back of my head, not as in, hey, I'm going to throw a bunch of pranks, but who is the one who has the reckoning. I feel like, and if you've seen the movie The Game, the person it's Michael Douglas. His character has a serious reckoning of his life, and so I'm like that. That was the angle. I was like, okay, if this is like The Game, then who is it that is the focus here? But then you shattered that illusion completely, and then it's like once I got to that point, it's like I'm pretty confident that I finished the book like within the next hour and a half. It was just like, I'm like, oh, it's not like that. It's like this. And I'm like, holy shit, here we go. We're off to the races. So yeah, for me to take a book like that, and it has four, actually more than that, first person narratives, which I don't like, but you nailed it. You knocked it out of the park. And so I'm going to start reading more multi first person narrative books. But yeah, that was, and I
Yeah,
didn't take, it didn't take me long to finish it, man. I mean, it's like, this is like a 2 sitting book. So you just go right through you.
awesome. No, it's good to hear, Bob. Thanks, man. But yeah, it was important to me to get as many perspectives as possible on what was happening. And I always kind of liked that. I saw it in like the Game of Thrones books or Song of Ice and Fire or whatever. You would always get the events from like different people, and I'm fascinated by narratives where you get that. So something will happen, but you'll see it from almost everybody's different point of view, and they all see what's happened in a slightly different way. And it creates some ambiguity and it creates some tension in that way. And I've always wanted to write a book from those different points of view to see, firstly, if I could do it, and secondly, because it is effective, if I could, get it into play, basically. Yeah, so I was pleased with that, and I think of the four main guys, I think Ethan was probably the most fun to write. He's a bit of a bastard, but also he's kind of fun too. Like, you writing from somebody who's not your experience, because he's very moneyed and he's very privileged. So yeah, that was a fun one to write. That had its own benefits, right? His perspective, I think. But yeah, I would recommend. I'm trying to think of some that are similar, Bob, but I think first person narratives like that in particular can be so effective if it's done right. It's immersive, hopefully.
Yeah, I definitely found it that way. It was a really good way to get into each character and immersively. And in this type of story, you need that perspective. You know, I can't imagine it being written in third person. I can't even fathom it.
No, I don't think it would have worked. To be honest, I genuinely don't. There's too much distance. I think if I'd have written it that way, I think
Yeah.
you needed some of the
Yeah.
monologue and the internal thought behind some of the decisions that are being made. I think if you lack that, it would have been a cold novel, and I don't think it would have been as effective. To be honest.
Right. And you need that intimacy. And you kept every
Yeah.
voice distinct and the speech patterns and yeah, masterful work, man. It was great.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I'd like to need to extend some thanks to Aubrey Parsons, who narrated the audiobook as well, for bringing each of those different individuals to life, because it could have been quite samey, I guess, if he hadn't nailed it. But yeah, respect to him, because he's a master of his craft. He's delivered a good audiobook, it has to be said.
Yeah, you're not gonna get samey with Aubrey Parsons. My introduction to him being with David Moody, and in fact, his first David Moody book, I think he was narrating a woman from Leeds. That was his
Yeah,
starting point, which was quite
yeah,
ambitious for a gentleman from Wales, but he absolutely
yeah.
does it. He can do all the accents, as we say. You tell him
Oh yeah,
which one, and he'll do it. He can do the Liverpool, that's a favourite of Bob's, and
yeah.
probably do the London as well. But I tell you, to go back to different perspectives, I mean, it was very ambitious and almost daring in the way that you're like, right, we're going to have multiple first person perspectives in terms of the main party. We're also going to throw in a few chapters with third person perspectives with the locals. And, in the hands of a lesser writer, this may have absolutely fallen apart, but it's like you kind of got the benefit of every single perspective or way in which you could tell a story. It's kind of unconventional, and yet it has worked.
It's interesting, really, because I had feedback from different people. Uh, One of them said, drop two of these perspectives. Like, don't give us first person from everybody, because then we get too much information. And I juggled that for quite a while, actually, and thought about doing it differently. And I was like, no, do you know what? I'm going to stick to my guns here. I've written it in the way that I wanted to write it, and this is a hill I'll die on, this one. And then I got other feedback from somebody else who said, oh, drop the perspective of the locals. We don't need it. Well, to my mind, one of the things I thought was quite important, really, was to make sure that they weren't two dimensional individuals, to understand, to see see the pursuers only through the eyes of the pursued gives you like almost like a flat perspective of them, but to see their snippets of their lives away from this to find out what type of people they actually are, I thought just gave them a bit more character. And they might not have been the most action packed scenes, but every scene has to have a purpose, and they were two very clear character scenes to my mind, and just added a bit of depth to the story. That's certainly what I was trying to achieve with them anyway. And I thought they were necessary, so I kind of battled the opinions of beta readers and whatnot on that one. And yeah, I think overall made the right decision. I wasn't sure for quite some time when I was going through the edits, particularly about the perspectives of the locals. I wasn't 100% sure about that, but I stuck to my guns, and do you know what? People seem to be enjoying it, so maybe gut instinct won out for once, which is nice. So,
And did you know that this was going to be multiple perspectives early on? Was that something that came kind of later into the process?
and yeah, to be honest, I knew by the fourth chapter, because the first four chapters are all told from the perspective of each of the four main characters. And at that point, I thought, well, maybe not everybody's going to have an equal say, but everybody will have another say, if that makes sense. So yeah, I knew at that point. I mean, I knew who kind of the main perspectives that I wanted were going to be, but I thought it was important to give the colour and the consistency of letting everybody have a turn, really. And I think once I'd done the first four chapters, I felt confident enough to be able to continue it throughout the book, really.
Man, that's great that you landed on it so early because, yeah, I know with some people, they'd write the entire story from one perspective and then they'd be like, this is missing something. Oh,
Yeah,
shit. It's missing another, what, five perspectives. And then you have to redo it. I mean, yeah, it's not actually that uncommon to realize my book is told in the wrong perspective
yeah,
or from the wrong point of view. Now I've got to redo it. And, it's kind of like you said before, you've written this book this year, 80,000 words. It took you 150,000 to get to it. But from what you're saying here, it sounds like as much as a book ever can be, that this one came out quite clean. It was quite fully formed to begin with.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exactly why I've had to rewrite this book this year. I wrote it in the wrong perspective, and even now, looking at how I've written it, because I wrote it in third originally. Now I've written it in first. Sorry. Now I'm looking at it thinking I might need another voice in here. So that one has been more of a struggle. This one, yeah, kind of flew out largely fully formed, which was beneficial. And I wrote this at a time when I was in plaster as well. So like, I'd broken my wrist and it was painful to type. So I don't know if that helped me put some adrenaline into the words. I don't know. But I was sitting down for weeks on end to type and it was hurting me to do so. So I don't know if that helped too. I'm not sure I'd want to break my arm every time I'm going to write a book. But yeah, it's maybe I added a little bit of pep and a little bit of adrenaline to it because it was difficult to sit down at the keyboard for a couple of weeks at one point. So it was strange. It just came out. It was like, there was no real structural edits that needed doing. I think I moved one chapter kind of earlier into the book, and that was about it. To be honest, it was mostly came out as is certainly in terms of the structure anyway, which was a huge bonus because this year has been a tough novel writing year. Rewriting the same book twice, would not recommend.
Yeah, I mean, breaking your arm, it's something to have in the toolkit, but it's probably not something that we would advise. That isn't the writing advice. It's like, bloody hell, this week there was some weird writing advice on This Is Horror.
Yeah,
If in a rut, break your arm and try again. But I mean, I can see how it could have aided the process to a point because you can't type as quickly, it's forcing you to think slower, to consider the word slower. Added to which, I mean, you're writing an angry book. Well, I think if my
yeah,
arm's broke, I'm gonna be pretty fucking angry. So there
yeah.
you
I
go.
mean, it got me in trouble. This book, like, I broke my wrist. They kind of like they sent me home in like a splint, so it's like a removable splint. Yeah, so they sent me home, and then they said, "Come back in 2 weeks. We'll check on you, and then I'm sure it'll all be fine." Came back in 2 weeks. It was a different doctor, and he was like, "Well, I want to X-ray you again." He did. He went, "This is worse than I thought. You've got to go into a plaster cast now." So I fucking hell. So that meant I couldn't drive, so I couldn't do the school run, couldn't take my daughter to stuff. It put huge pressure on the family. I'd broken my wrist playing football, which at nearly 40 is a bit fucking embarrassing. Um, and so I signed off work for a week, and I was like, well, what am I going to do if I'm not working during the day? I'm going to write. So I was sat and I'd like twisted myself so I could keep my arm in a straight line in this plaster cast to type, and it hurt like an absolute bastard. And I was getting told off. Like, even my mum was like, "Why are you writing now? Like, you should be resting your arm. You don't have to work." And I'm like, "But I really like this book that I'm writing, so I can do it anyway." And people were just like, "You're an idiot. Like, you should just be resting." But yeah, it just came out. So yeah, I used like my week's sick leave to help add some words to this book. Why not? And I don't regret it. I mean, my arm's mangled now, obviously. You know, it'll never be the same. But but yeah, it was worth it. It's fine. It's cool. It's got to be done. Sometimes you need an outlet, and I just carried on. It's the most rock and roll thing I've ever done.
Yeah, I relate to what you're saying. I don't necessarily think it's something we should endorse, but I'm very bad at taking a sick day to just be
Yeah,
sick. It's like if there is writing to be done,
yeah,
it kind of goes back to Jonathan Janz's "it's good because," and I don't think this is what he meant it to be used in, but it's like, look, I'm taking this day off work. I might as well try and be as productive as possible.
yeah.
You know,
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And it was painful. It was pretty stupid, but the book came out pretty well, so I'm happy.
yeah. I mean, the other alternative would be to try writing it through like kind of voice notes and audio. And I know that Josh Malaman, Jesus Christ, why am I obsessed with him today? It's all coming out organically. He's doing this experiment, soon, where he's going to write a novel through voice notes. But to me, that is not really how my brain works at all. I almost have to write things down to realize what I think.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think I could sit here and dictate a book. Maybe dialogue, but I don't think I could, do scene description or, you know, action or what. No, there's absolutely no way I could just sit there and speak a book like that. In itself is it feels alien even saying that out loud, let alone talking your way through an entire book. And you've got the problem of the computer's not going to understand every word, so some of it's just going to be utter bloody gibberish as well. It wouldn't work for me, to be honest. But let's face it, if anybody can pull it off, it's Josh, isn't it? So yeah, I imagine it'll still turn out to be absolutely awesome, even if it's beyond the grasp of us mere mortals.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I imagine that he's doing this as a first draft and is then gonna polish it off. I don't think it's one take and that's it. But it could
Ah,
be. It
it
could
could be.
be.
That's the
No.
thing with Josh. You
Yeah,
you do never know. So yeah, fair play
yeah,
to him.
yeah. But I
Yeah.
think, you said that the computer might misunderstand what you're saying, but I'm sure we've all had these situations where either we've done a kind of accidental typo, or sometimes when I'm handwriting, I can't read what what I've written at times. It's like, what the hell am I going on about? But sometimes the accidental typo or the misreading of a word, it can lead to something that's like, wow, that is more original or that is more creative. So sometimes in making these errors, you actually have breakthroughs.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been handwriting a story today actually, which is very rare for me. Um, we love the Christmas ghost story tradition in this house, so I'm writing one that I'm going to read to my daughter on Christmas Eve. And I was writing it by hand, and I was just writing it. I was like, Jesus, like I've got to read this by like low light. It's like full on daylight. I can barely read my own handwriting. God knows what is going to come out when I actually sit down to read it to her. But but yeah, you got to try things. Got to do something that's a little bit different every now and then.
Now, you mentioned previously releasing the novella Territory, and perhaps on first glance, people would think, okay, Last Night of Freedom and Territory, this kind of isolation and Arctic horror, don't have a lot in common. But the more that I look at them, the more there really is commonalities in terms of survival, in terms of kind of being against the elements or being against the locals. And also, the fundamental idea is that you are encroaching on the locals' territory or you are encroaching upon the animals' territory. So, in terms of the writing, were you aware how many parallels there were at the time, or was this perhaps something that only upon reflection became obvious?
It only came to me afterwards. Really, it's like I read and this seems to happen to me a lot. Like um, when I released Dark Missives, I read a review, and somebody was like, "Wow, this guy's like really thinking deeply about what it means to be a parent." I can't be thinking that deeply about it because it was only when I read that review that I realised how many of those stories were about being a parent. But yeah, there are some commonalities, to be fair, and I think there's questions of masculinity in that book as well, in Territory, to be honest, because where this community lives is very hard, and there are expectations around everybody there, to be honest, and it isn't just masculinity. It's about the question of what it takes to survive in that situation. The main voice character is a man, but there are very strong female supporting characters in Territory. There's another hunter in there who's female, and she kind of it's interesting to address the same question as what it takes to survive. The expectations on the male hunter are extremely different to the expectations on a female hunter, but they both have the same goal. And I think that was an interesting thing to kind of explore and to look at, really. So yeah, I think isolation is definitely, and survivalism are definitely things that I'm interested in my fiction. And I think if it wasn't for the common sense and level head of my wife, I think survivalism would be something I'd probably be more into in my day to day life. We've got a basement in this house, and there'd probably be some sort of nuclear fallout shelter if I had my own way. But as it is, we just store a load of old crap down there instead. But I do occasionally go down the steps and go, it's got potential, this place. So yeah, maybe it's something I'm more into than I thoroughly realised until I'd written these books.
Yeah, with Territory, I felt like it was a. I don't know if you're familiar with Wolfen, but
Mm.
in Whitley Strieber's Wolfen, and they made a movie. It's basically about wolves in New York City, um, getting into the very gentrified areas and reclaiming theirs. And these are super intelligent wolves. So the book is really good. The movie is also the adaptation is also very good. It's definitely of the 80s. But I felt like this was kind of like in a sense there because you have these wolves that you know without spoiling anything they kind of work in the same way. They're very intelligent, and you have territory. It goes both ways. You have humans wanting to stake their claim, and you have you know wolves that are going to make their claim. And so I felt like it was almost like a wolf in reverse. Instead of like coming into the city, it's like they're reclaiming their natural habitat. And I felt that was a very interesting dynamic. Doing the wolves like that, they were truly scary. They were very scary, and it just like these aren't. I've seen a bunch of wolf movies and read a bunch of books about wolves, other than werewolves, and these wolves were very cunning, very malicious.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting issue, and one of the most gratifying comments I've ever had about my writing was somebody said that the novella Territory is set in Finland, and somebody from Finland read the book, and I was like, I'd met them in person at a convention, and he was like, "Can I have a copy?" I was like, "Yeah, of course," and I was like, "Oh shit!" Like, I've never been to Finland. I did as much research as was humanly possible, at the time. Read up on it as much as I could, listened to podcasts and all sorts of stuff. YouTube is obviously a huge resource if you know how to use it properly. So I was like, I've done my absolute best with this, but if he tears it to pieces, like, I'm going to feel like a failure here. And he got in touch afterwards and said, he said that the thing is, you've nailed both sides of the issue, because not only is kind of the management of the wolf population in Finland and other countries a kind of conservation issue, it's an issue for farmers, it's a political issue. It's multifaceted, really. So for him to say that was really good. And then, interestingly enough, I was driving somewhere. It was only like 2 days ago, and I heard a program on the radio about how wolves have been reintroduced across Europe in certain countries, and how farmers are struggling to adapt. So the wolves have adapted, as you would imagine, to the terrain, to the territory, if you will, pardon the pun. But farmers are struggling to adapt to a predator being on their land that hasn't been there for a generation, and they've forgotten how to manage it. And their first instinct is they want to kill them, but they've been reintroduced to protect them and to get their numbers up. So the government are trying to teach them alternative methods of farming and bringing up their livestock, whilst also being able to protect them from wolves without shooting the wolves. So yeah, it's a very layered issue, and one that I just thought was like ripe for fiction, because you've got the interpersonal tensions of people who believe different things about the situation, but you've also got the overbearing kind of natural conservationist and instinctive actions of the wolves that are playing havoc on the community and those relationships within it. So yeah, I tried to make it as layered and as nuanced as possible, that book, really, and it's one that I enjoy. I can still remember writing that, and it was inadvertent help from our friend. Here we go. I'm going to mention him now, Josh Mallerman, because the voice, I couldn't get the voice right. I wrote that book like 3-4 times, and then I read Mallory, and it's like third person present, and I was like, that's how it's got to be. So that kind of cracked it for me, really, because I just could not get that book to work in kind of a kind of fairly distant third person past tense. And then it was reading Mallory, I thought, third person present will crack it, and it gave it more urgency. So yeah, sometimes you just read the right book at the right time, and it gives you that little spark of now I see the way. So it was good timing.
Yeah, it's amazing how, a perspective shift can breathe new life, or can breathe the right life into a story. As someone who has written in numerous perspectives, is there a perspective that you find yourself most comfortable with, or that you gravitate towards more, or have you almost transcended past that where, it's anything goes?
There's certainly some that I'm more interested in than others. I find writing in the past tense more difficult, to be honest. And I've got here, like, I can't turn the camera around to show you, but I've written up like some of the key rules from Chuck Palahniuk's Consider This, and I have them on very faded post-it notes up here. And one of the things is like limit and remove, like has, had, is, was, like redundant, needless words. And when I write in third person past, I find it very hard to get rid of some of those words. Yet when I write in the present tense in any perspective, I find it much easier to be more direct and to be more active and kinetic within the prose. So yeah, I often stay away from that one. But in terms of voice, sometimes it just comes naturally. Like I've written a few short stories recently that have been beta read, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but our mutual friend Kev Harrison came back with a line that both pleased and kind of upset me in the feedback. He said, "Your restrained first person psychopath voice is so convincing now that I'm beginning to worry you might have bodies buried in the garden." So sometimes the voice just comes out. Like there's one particular story that I've written that will be published next year called Off Book. So it's about an actor who is playing a serial killer in like a true crime book and begins to undertake some of the necessary actions to get into character. And that voice just came out. Like it wouldn't have gone any other way than like first person, really. And you just had to be in that person's head to be able to write that. But yeah, I think I've got into the habit now of knowing, apart from the novel this year, which has been difficult, I have second guessed myself over that. But generally in shorter fiction, I can just, yeah, I know exactly when I sit down from the first line, right, this is going to be third, this is going to be first. And usually it just comes out with the idea. I feel like you either know or you don't sometimes. Certainly how I feel about it. I don't know about how it works for you too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, actually, interestingly, I would say probably first person past is what I'm most comfortable with, and then close third person past is, yeah, a close second, as it were. I just
Yeah.
prefer writing in past as opposed to present. I mean, of course, I've written a number of things in present, um, although equally and rather annoyingly, there's a book I'm working on at the moment where some scenes feel like they will be so much better in present, but then 80% feels like it will be better in past. And I know we spoke about being experimental before, but that is an experiment too more.
Yeah.
Too much, that too far. That is schizophrenic behavior right there, which you could do if there was a reveal that it then became obvious as to why this
Yeah.
narrator can't discern between the present and the past. But if that isn't a central part of the book, then
Yeah.
you're just gonna look like a nutter.
Yeah, just it'll look badly edited if it's not done correctly, basically. I mean, it's interesting that you say about first person past, because I always think like when I read a book that's in that tense and in that perspective, I always think there needs to be like a framing device around it, as in how does this story exist if somebody is telling me like almost like person to person how these events transpired. Like I always feel that there needs to be some sort of, yeah, is it like a diary or a podcast or something? I always feel there needs to be a device around it, and that's what puts me off, particularly writing first person
Mm-hmm.
past, because in first person present you're living the events at the same time as the narrator, whereas otherwise you're being told what's happened in the past. And I don't know, I struggle with urgency, to be honest, if when I'm writing in those situations, which is why I rarely do, because it just doesn't come naturally to me.
Mm-hmm. I think David Morrell had a problem with that. And when I was reading his the Successful Writer's book, that he always had a problem with first person because he felt like that it was, it's like taken completely out of context. It's like, how are we getting the story? How's the story being delivered? And so he avoided it for the longest time. Um, and then I don't know, I can't remember exactly. Maybe he either figured it out or someone suggested, hey, it's just like you're sitting at a bar and someone's telling you a story. And they're really, really good storyteller. And it's a story that they were in. So I'm thinking that's probably the best way to do it is without even a framing device, is that you just basically start the story. And, to me, that first person past tense would be there because I survived these events. I'm going to tell you about them, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
So I know that you've got Lionhearts coming out next year. I believe
yep.
it's coming out around April time. And you said that you're also working on another book. You've written a number of books. Are you looking at getting into a kind of 2 books per year routine? Is there a method to the publishing schedule, or is it more a case of as the books come out, as the books are written, you will then kind of put them out?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a backlog, and some of it is like I should have more books out than I do. Really, like I lost the whole of 2023 because I spent a lot of time chasing an agent, and well, not just like one. I wasn't just running down the street after one agent, but I was trying very, very hard to get an agent, and the whole time I was thinking, well, I can't put these books out because you know somebody might take them, and then at this point I'll get a better deal than if I do it myself and all this kind of stuff. And I had a lot of questions, and yeah, it didn't quite work out. It nearly did, but not quite. So 2023 was like a lost year, really. And in reality, that's when Last Night of Freedom should have come out. Um, yeah, I think 2025 will be a 2 book year. I think they probably all could if I wanted them to be. I've certainly got enough books in the tank. A lot of them need editing, to be honest. I'm very, very good at writing a first draft through to completion. I'm not so good at going back and then fixing the things that need to be fixed because, like the magpie I am, I'm like, oh, well, I've got this idea now, so I can just write that one. And then I don't always go back and edit like I should. So if I can get myself into a bit more of an organized routine, I am productive and prolific. It's just I'm not very organized in the way I go about things. So I've got 2 books planned for next year anyway. So I've got Lionhearts at some point, maybe March, April, and then I've got a novella called The Passenger as well, which I'm going to bring out. So that one's definitely coming out as well. So Lionhearts is a bit of a departure, maybe not quite horror. It's done well for me, but it's never quite got over the line with like agents and stuff. So it's come runner up in a number of competitions. New Writing North, which is quite a big like charity and writing organisation over here, got on the shortlist for one of their Northern Debut Awards in 2021. Didn't win, but got on the shortlist. And then this year I came second in the Liverpool Pulp Idol competition as well. Um, Again, that got me on a couple of publishers' radars who took the full but didn't take it. So, and I put it out myself. I know there's a significant change that I need to make in the book in order to make it more effective because I've had some feedback from beta readers and they've all said the same thing. So I need to sort that. The pitch for it is a bit odd, like compared to it's, as I say, it's not really horror. It's so This Is England meets Taxi Driver, really. So a few years ago, literally, I can almost see it from my house. There was a big gas explosion in a nearby like area of the town. It blew up a lot of people's homes and businesses and stuff. And the government, as they often do in the north of England, just left us hanging. There was like no funding coming in. There was no support. People lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods. There was no help. And I just kind of had the idea about, well, what type of people would benefit from this kind of disruption. And unfortunately, it's the usual types, the kind of right wing, hardline, banging the drum of kind of racism and all that kind of stuff. So Lionheart's is a story of a man who loses his livelihood in that explosion, and then the only way he can find out of it, the only help he gets offered is from this right wing organisation. And then it becomes a question of, is he going to sell his principles and effectively sell his soul for this help? And if he does, can he get out of it again? So there's an element of kind of domestic thriller to it. There's an element of kind of all that vile right wing politics to it as well. So it's part thriller, part I don't know, literary, I guess, part crime. It's a bit of a tweener. It's kind of not quite one thing. It's not quite the other. It's yeah, I like it though. It's a horrible book, but it's not a horror book, perhaps.
Well, I mean, ever since you told me about both Last Night of Freedom and Lionhearts, I was totally in for reading both of them. And yeah, given the execution of Last Night of Freedom, Lionhearts is right at the top of the list as soon as I get a copy. So I am very excited to read it. And yeah, as a fan of both This Is England and Taxi Driver, this is exactly the kind of stuff that I like to read. I mean, you probably know it's what I like to read anyway, because I read these kind of horror adjacent dark thrillers, dark fiction. This is the kind of thing that if you hadn't written it, you'd have probably brought it to me and been like, this is something you have to read. It would be a recommendation. It's not so far off something I could imagine maybe Will Carver writing.
Yeah, and those are the kind of books that always pique our collective interest, aren't they, Michael? Like Will has been on the show and he's been classified as a crime writer, but he isn't. And to be honest, you read some of the stuff he puts out on the internet. I don't think he wants to be classified as a crime writer, but he's is he writing horror? I think we can take the best things from different genres and mash them together. It's hard to then sell that book, but it's actually entertaining and gratifying to write that book. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, this I wrote this one during lockdown, and it's bounced around so many agents and publishers' desks that it's finally back in my own hands now. So yeah, I'm gonna bring that one out next year. And I've got, I imagine you have, obviously, both of you two. I've got kind of like a brand now for the novels as well. So Last Night Freedom has got kind of a clear aesthetic. A lot of it's in red, and then it's kind of, there's a frame to it as well. Lionhearts is going to be like the similar frame, but it's going to be mostly blue cover. So it kind of, yeah, it ends up with kind of clear author brand really. And I think the guy Paul Stevenson, who I met through the Other Stories podcast, is awesome cover artist, and sometimes I feel like he can literally see into my brain when I tell him what I want. But yeah, he's really outdone himself with these covers, and hopefully they'll start to look consistent, and it'll be something you'll be able to see and instantly know is mine, really, and that's where I want to be. So yeah, fingers crossed for that one. It's a tough sell because you think about where you'd go for reviews and where you'd go for kind of promo. I'm not sure it's horror enough for some of the outlets that I know, but then I'm not sure it's crime enough for others. So be interesting to see where it lands and what type of readers it brings, really. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I feel within the horror community, which I can obviously speak more to than the crime community, despite a lot of us branding ourselves as being horror fiction, when I think about websites and podcasts and publishers, we just want to read good fiction and good stories. So, you look
Yeah,
at Ghoulish Books, I mean, they put out a wide range of different things that are in this kind of dark fiction realm. I mean, even the people we interview at This Is Horror, it's funny because some interviews you could be like, no, it fucking ain't. It's like, well it is because we've got this wide definition. We're redefining what horror is, which sounds terribly pretentious. But, I think there are misconceptions as to what horror is. And we've said before, I think it was Simon Stranzas who first said it, horror is a lens rather than a genre. So, I mean, what you're
yeah,
doing, what you're approaching, that is horror to me. You look at the Ark Party, Rob Olson. I mean, his show is primarily horror, but he'll cover crime. He'll cover
Yeah, of
dark
course, yeah.
fiction and dark thrillers. So I think, yeah, there's certainly an appetite within the horror community, and a lot of us, we just want good, interesting writing. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping, fingers crossed, that you'll be pleasantly surprised as to how many people are actually up for reading Lionhearts, particularly, again, off the strength of Last Night of Freedom, which, if people are listening and they haven't read it and they haven't bought it, you absolutely need to. That is my strongest recommendation for this year. Buy the bloody book.
Mhm.
Buy Last Night of Freedom. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
asked you nicely to now, and then now I'm semi-aggressively trying to force you to. But it's so good, and Aubrey Parsons does such a wonderful job of narrating it as well. So if you want an audiobook, that is a good one. I mean, he's narrated two of my favorite books of the year: Last Night of Freedom by Dan Howarth and Shadowlocked by David Moody, and he's done a damn good job with both of them.
Oh, I didn't know he'd done Shadowlocked. That is a really good book. Like,
It
Hmm.
yeah,
is.
Dave sent me a paperback copy of it, and yeah, I mean, his range is like just superb as a writer. When you look at his output, you know, some of the ambition that he's shown, like in some of his stories, and it's yeah, Shadowlocked is a great book. I didn't know Aubrey had done the audiobook because obviously I read the physical book, but yeah, that's a great book. What good company to be in. Really good book. Loved Shadowlocked. Really good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a digression, and we'll come back to your work in a moment. But as you mentioned, David Moody and how good Shadowlocked is, as much as I love his zombie stuff and his hater stuff, I am excited that at the moment he's trying these different things because he's such a phenomenal writer. I'm greedy. I want the autumn stuff and I want these experiments.
Yeah,
And it's a good time to be a David Moody reader because I know he's got another one coming out. I mean, you said in fact that you beta read it, or he told me you did. One of you did.
yeah,
I've got that information, and I think for people into Shadowlocked, it sounds like he's done another in this dark thriller vein.
yeah. Uh, Dirty Day, it's called.
Dirty
Um,
Day, yeah.
yeah, and it's a really really good book. To be fair, it's kind of like written in real time. So again, I
Mm,
think it's like first person present, but everything in it is so urgent. I think it's written over the course of like a couple of hours and stuff. But it's excellent, really good. Highly
yeah.
recommended for when that comes out.
All right. Now, I mean, one thing I wanted to talk about before we end this wonderful conversation is, you said the previous year you were looking at getting an agent, but then you decided you were going to put out, a number of your books in an indie fashion, so to put them out independently. At this point, particularly when you've now got the cover branding, what considerations do you have when you finish a story as to whether to put this out independently or whether to approach someone else, be that a publisher, an agent, or, whoever?
I think it's all about what you can, where you want to be and what you kind of want from your writing career. There's certain things that you can easily, well, not easily, but certain things that are within reach to you as a writer and to you as an independent publisher. And there are certain things that aren't. You know, I had a conversation with an agent on the phone not all that long ago, and he said, "What he said, I know that you're putting books out on your own. So what do you want me to help you with?" And ultimately, part of it is access. I can't get my own books on the shelves of Waterstones. I can go into my local branch and say, hey, I'm a local author, can you order my books in? But I can't distribute to Waterstones. I can't distribute to bookshops nationally without contacting them all individually and pushing it out. And that's a full-time job in and of itself. I can't do that. I can't get on a supermarket shelf. I'm not saying that anybody's going down Asda to buy a copy of Last Night of Freedom, a bloody stag party thriller, but I don't have that access. So I think part of it is there's a lot of things I can do for myself, and there's certain things that I can't. And it's how badly I want to push to get the things that I can't do for myself. Because at the moment, the branding and all that kind of stuff, it's a very professional product. I've found a good distributor who's running off really good quality copies of the books, so it all looks really good. We're in touch as you are, Michael, with Aubrey and really high quality producers. The other stories, Hawk and Cleaver, they produced the audiobook for Territory to a very, very high standard, and it was excellent. So for a large part, we as independents can do the majority of things. I think if I ever wanted more, if I ever wanted that distribution or the access to bigger publishers and bigger distribution and film deals and those kind of things, which I think every writer wants, it's at that point you have to go to an agent. So it's striking the balance. Some I don't necessarily think Lionhearts is. I think it's certainly the way it's written has got the attention of publishers and agents. I don't think they see any commercial value in publishing it, which is one of the considerations behind why it wasn't picked up. That's not to say that other ideas I've got wouldn't be more commercial, but I think it's picking and choosing. And again, maybe it comes back to what we were saying before about filmmakers and actors, one for me, one for them. Well, maybe certain projects are just for me, and I'll put them out in my own way and in my own time as and when I see fit. And maybe there's other projects that are more suitable to that wider distribution or to a bigger publisher who can do more with it than I can myself. I think it's picking and choosing and not chasing every project and not chasing every agent. I think I did some of that indiscriminately, and wasted some time on people who were probably never going to be interested in my work. And that was a hard lesson that I learned, because that's time that I can't get back. And 2023, unfortunately, it's a shame. I think back on it now. 2022 Territory came out. I wrote Last Night of Freedom in 2022. I probably could have, well, I definitely could have released it last year instead of this year. I lost that year chasing something that I didn't get, but I also learned a lot in doing that as well. So hopefully, if I do go back to agents in coming weeks or months or years or whenever I decide to do it, I'll know more now, and it'll be a more efficient process. You can't guarantee it'll be a more successful one, but I'll certainly be able to go about it in a better way now. So yeah, I did lose some time, and that's a shame, but I gained a lot of knowledge. And you got to try and look at the positives and take the lessons where you can. So yeah, I think that's the situation I find myself in, and I feel lucky that I've got the means. It's not always accessible to be able to put your own work out into the world and to have access to good people. But I've certainly, I'm fortunate to have the means to be able to pay people to do the covers, pay Aubrey to do the audiobook, for example, and I'm lucky to have the access to them as well. So you make those connections, and you'd be mad not to use them, really.
Yeah, and I think, you've come out the other side of, finding 2023 a disappointing year, and ultimately you seem hungrier, you seem more productive. And also, I mean, you're submitting to other places, you are having conversations, but you're ultimately saying, you know what, if someone doesn't pick it up, I choose myself because I know that I'm good enough and I'm going to put it into the world. And, sometimes that's what you need to do. And we see too, we have seen so many times that actually when you're writing things that they don't necessarily fit into this neat genre box, the way that they're often picked up by a bigger publisher, and that there's some annoyance over this, but it's the way that it works. they see your other projects sell well, and then you become a kind of easier sell for them. So a lot of people, they have
Yeah.
the success independently to get to the mainstream publisher, and that is becoming more and more a viable route. But I love that you're choosing yourself. I love that you're putting these books out there because they deserve to be out there. You know, I've had a great time reading it. People who've listened to this, they get it. They're like, yeah, all right. You've told us how much you like Last Night of Freedom, but I want this book to do really well. I want people to read it because it deserves to. You know, it's the same with people like we said before, Will Carver and Matt Wesolowski. They're two of the best writers on the planet, putting out original and interesting stories. But because they don't necessarily fit into a niche genre, they're not as well known. And so little by little, we're trying to do that at This Is Horror. Get people who should be wider read, wider read. Last Night of Freedom, buy it now.
What a note to end on. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks, mate.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.